In this video, I will be demonstrating how to polish an AK style rifle trigger group. This information will be applicable to most trigger systems. Regardless of the trigger type, the trick is determining where the trigger system components come into contact, interact, and then polishing that interface. Generally, after some use, the trigger components will show wear at these contact points, which will also make them easier to identify. The goal is to create smooth contact surfaces and reduce as much friction as possible between the two parts. If you look back in my video history, I've posted a video on how to polish a Mil-Spec AR-15 trigger group as well. As always with my video, timestamps will be in the description, so you can skip to the sweet polishing action if you want. Regarding safety, taking too much material off or changing angles on the components could render the trigger unsafe. We only want to polish the surfaces of the shapes that are already there. Obviously wear safety glasses whenever you're doing gunsmithing, and do not attempt this if you're unsure at all. A note on some triggers, it's not as much with AK triggers, but with some AR trigger groups, they will have precision ground or wire EDM surfaces that keep tight tolerances. An example of this is like the Geissele 2-stage triggers for AR-15s. You wouldn't want to polish those surfaces. Other trigger groups might have NP3 nickel Teflon or electroless nickel coating that you would also want to leave alone. In general, if it's cast or metal injection molded steel, MIM steel with a nitride or phosphite finish like these two trigger groups I'm showing right here, you're pretty much good to go and polish away. As a side note, if you aren't running trigger pin retaining plates like this one in your AK, I would highly recommend it. They make disassembly and assembly of the trigger components in the receiver much easier. You just don't have to deal with these stupid little pin retaining clips, and these are only like $5 to $10. They're also going to be more robust than these clips as well. So why do we want to polish an AK trigger, or any trigger for that matter? Well, it'll make the trigger smoother and feel better. In a shooting application where a good trigger pull is crucial for accuracy, the smoothness will help. Polishing an AK trigger group, in my experience, also drops the pull weight about a half a pound. You can also shoot faster if you like converting money into noise like I do. AK triggers, just based on the nature of them and how they're manufactured, just like the rifles, can be pretty rough. The finish on these cast or metal injection molded parts can create excess friction and make the trigger feel really gritty and unnecessarily heavy. So I'm going to be polishing these components also to a smoother finish than they would have after thousands of rounds through the rifle as well. This is the FIME Group enhanced 2-stage trigger that I will be installing in my Zastava M90 that I'm currently working on. The polishing I show here on this trigger group will apply to all AK trigger groups because they all have the same basic components, contact surfaces, and operate in a similar manner. I'm not going to show the removal or installation of the AK trigger group, as there's plenty of videos on that out there. Before we get into polishing anything, let's take a close look at this factory AK trigger group to understand how it operates and where interactions occur. This will guide us to the areas that need attention and that we'll be polishing. So this is the hammer, this is your trigger, this is the disconnector. It's a separate piece. It's got a little coil spring under the back of it right here. There's a roll pin shim holding the whole thing together. Trigger pin goes through that. Hammer pin goes through there. Your hammer's cocked. You're ready to fire. The trigger and the hammer are sitting in there like this. You can see this hook right here is grabbing this surface of the hammer. When you pull the trigger, the hammer gets released by that hook and goes forward, smacks into the back of your bolt, hitting the firing pin in there, igniting the round. Your bolt carrier comes back, and as it does, it rotates the bolt in the cam pin and unlocks it. And then this little tab right here on the back of the bolt carrier hits right here on the hammer and starts pushing it back down, and then it keeps sliding back and it recocks it, and then the recoil spring will push it back in a battery. Bolt will lock and you're ready to shoot again. If you hold the trigger to the rear while it's cycling, the hammer's going to come back down and push the disconnector out of the way and then hook underneath it like that. And then when you let the trigger back forward, the disconnector is going to let go and the hammer is going to get caught again underneath the forward hook. So that's how this trigger system works. It's pretty simple, works well, it's robust, it's reliable, but leaves lots of room for improvement. You can see how rough the finishes are on this. Let's see where we can polish. So let's start with obvious. This area right here and the underside of this hook right here. We can polish this face of the hammer where the bolt rubs on it and drives it back down and rubs over the top of it. We can polish the back of this little radius right here and the top of this disconnector. That's going to make it smoother when it's pushing that disconnector out of the way. And then to smooth up the reset of the trigger pull, we're going to polish right here where the disconnector grabs, and we're going to polish the underside of this disconnector hook to make sure that this pivots freely within the trigger right here, as we can polish the sides of it where it pivots with respect to the trigger. So I'm not going to polish this trigger group. Obviously, I'm going to polish the new trigger group that I got that's going in my rifle, but I wanted to show the interactions and the areas that can be polished on a factory AK trigger group, because that's what most of you are going to be working with if you're watching this video and want to polish your stuff up. These are the tools I use to clean up and polish trigger groups. I have a Dremel with a fine sanding drum, cloth buffing wheel, and some polishing compound. This isn't necessary, but it makes things go a bit quicker. I got a fine, sharp #2 file. I got some nice little fine needle files. I have medium fine and super fine stones, and then just some scraps of sandpaper, and of course safety glasses. So AK trigger groups are usually pretty rough. They're metal injection molded or cast parts are have a pretty rough finish on them. So mostly, for the most part, on trigger polishing work, I never start with a file, but in this case, I'm starting with a fine file to just start taking the high spots off of those surfaces where I will be polishing, because it would have taken forever with a fine stone. There you can see I just disassembled the trigger, pulled the disconnector out of it. It also has a little arm that I think helps reduce trigger slap or something. It's another part that just kind of hangs out in there with these FIME Group triggers. So still going through, roughing things out with the file. You always work from coarse to fine, obviously. You're going to see me manipulating these parts all around too, and hitting them from different angles and holding them differently and stuff like that. And that's just to make sure that I keep my stone or file either parallel or perpendicular to a certain surface, make sure I'm not knocking any edges off. I started hitting it with the that little pink India stone there, which is kind of like medium fine, and I went back and realized I needed to hit some of the rounded features that aren't so critical with some 400 grit sandpaper. So now I'm going through and carefully hitting the surfaces, like sear surfaces and things like that, with my stone, and making sure I'm doing it very carefully and not changing any angles or knocking any sharp edges off. So now I'm on to the really super fine hard ceramic stone, just to finish up all of the places that I've been working on, and hit them with the finest stone that I have. I also hit the little roll pin there that holds the trigger stuff together with some 400 grit sandpaper. It was a little rough. There you can see now I'm on to polishing with my Dremel, and I'm just picking up some polishing compound on this cotton buffing wheel and going back and hitting all the parts that I've hit with the file and then the stones, just to put a really good polish on them. Hammer hook right there, got a nice mirror finish on it. Top of the disconnector hook, where it's going to get pushed out of the way by the bottom side of the hammer. Underside of the disconnector hook right there, that's going to smooth up our reset. I got this whole surface polished right here where it's going to have the bolt riding over it. Got the ledge where the disconnector grabs polished, and we got the area that the hammer hook grabs on polished. Also got the polish on the back of the hammer here, where it's going to come down and push this disconnector out of the way. All the polishing done on this AK trigger group. That took me 20 minutes in total. So that wraps it up. That's how I polish an AK trigger group. You can see, what this one looks like, and it functions essentially the same way as the standard AK trigger group I showed. Same polishing process and procedure, and it'll really smooth up and improve the trigger pull on AK or any rifle you do this to. So I hope this was helpful, and thanks for watching.